Hey guys, it's Leah B from Prestige Veteran Medical Consulting. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, physician assistant, and former compensation and pension examiner. Today I have Rebecca Deming from ProVet Legal on to kind of go over some really important topics about filing VA disability claims. So for those of you that don't know her, she's done a lot of great content with us and brings a wealth of knowledge to the table from the legal and administrative side of VA claims related matters. Rebecca, do you want to just give them a quick intro to who you are and your experience?
Sure. Rebecca Deming, I own ProVet Legal. It's a law firm that specializes in helping veterans and their dependents access VA disability benefits. Um, I am married to a Navy veteran, and I spent about a decade, a little bit longer, working with military in different capacities overseas and in the U.S. So happy to be here supporting our veterans and helping you guys navigate this very complex system.
Yeah, so let's just jump right in. So filing a disability claim can be super complex and confusing because there's different things that you can file for, whether it's an appeal or a new claim or an increase or whatever. There's different ways that you can file for a claim. And so Rebecca is going to try to make this a little bit easier to like take in and make it maybe less overwhelming for some of you guys. Because there are a lot of tools out there, if you can access them and know where to access them, that can kind of take this burden a little bit and make it a little bit lighter for you. So I think the first thing that we wanted to go over was about eligibility. So how can someone determine their eligibility for even filing a claim?
Right. So first of all, obviously you have to be a veteran, and you have to have discharge that is other than dishonorable. So even sometimes an OTH, an other than honorable discharge, might qualify depending on the circumstances, and VA will look into that. That's called a character of discharge determination. So if you have a general or an honorable discharge, you're good to go. For administrative discharge, if you have an other than honorable, there's going to be some extra level of scrutiny, but it's not a total bar. If you have a dishonorable discharge, you want to try to find I mean, it might be a full bar, but if there's circumstances around that related to your PTSD or misunderstandings with your command or something else, there are attorneys who specialize in helping people get their discharge upgraded. And so that might be worth spending some money on because the lifetime of benefits that you can get from accessing this if you're eligible is well worth the upfront investment.
For sure.
So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is you have to have a disability, which is really kind of any sort of medical condition for the most part. I mean, obviously there's exceptions to everything, but it doesn't have to be like an amputation or a serious head injury. It could be, but it could also be gastroesophageal reflux disorder, GERD, or migraines or IBS or arthritis. So you have to have a current disability. I know a lot of people will say like, oh, I had COVID in the military, so therefore I should claim that now or something, or I was exposed to something in the military, so I get an automatic claim. You have to have a current disability. The fact that something might develop later down the line doesn't entitle you to benefits. You don't have to have all of the proof. Some people are like, well, I need to have everything lined up. It's like, no, you just kind of have to, there's some companies out there that will tell you just throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. I think people should do some internal personal audit on, do they have a disability and do they legitimately think that there's some reason why this might be connected to service? They could be wrong. You don't have to be right on the first application, but if you were in a car accident last week and you're trying to claim that your injuries from that car accident are related to your service 10 years ago, like that's not going to pass the sniff test.
Right. And everything's sort of in context too. There's no black and white answer for everything. And I actually just did a video on this a few days ago, sort of unrelated, but you made me think of it. The presumptive within 1 year stuff. So people seem to think that if they were diagnosed with anything within 1 year, that's going to automatically get service connected. And that's just not true. So for example, if I separated from service 3 months ago and I break my leg in a car accident tomorrow, that's clearly not related to service, right? So there's not an always or never situation. And you have to really look into the context of that disability. Presumptive within 1 year has its own list anyways that I've got a video on if you'd like to go take a look at it. But not to get too far off track, but just as you were saying, Rebecca, everything has context, right?
Right. And if you have a pre-existing condition, like those are usually not service connected unless they were aggravated during service. And so there, yeah, like you said, there is nuance there. And so I don't think veterans need to get too bogged down in the weeds on, is my claim going to win? I think you just have to have some kind of like, I put some thought into this, and I think there's a decent chance that this was caused or aggravated by service, and that I actually have a condition right now. You may not have a diagnosis, but you're having these symptoms. So like, you know, I haven't gone to the doctor yet, but my back hurts a whole lot. Like
Mm-hmm.
that may not be enough to win the claim, but that's enough to initiate a claim and kind of trigger VA to look into stuff for you sometimes.
Yeah. So what kind of supporting documentation do you think is important when you're getting ready to file a claim?
So that's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, the more prepared that you can be, the better. So if you have copies of your military personnel records, your medical, your service treatment records, your post-service treatment records, those statements from buddies that something happened in service, your DD-214, which would be part of your military personnel records. If you have all of that, you kind of want to pull together the key pieces that show that you're eligible, that you're a veteran with eligible service and an honorable or general discharge typically. And as much supporting evidence to show that something happened in service and that you have a current disability and the two are related, like that would be the kind of the gold standard. But I think people get bogged down by that standard and they don't know where to begin to find their DD-214. And so filling out the form itself, you don't have to have the copy of your DD-214. VA has a duty to go get that. And so if you give them your social security number and some of the information on the questions in the form, they'll go get that information for you. They'll also get your service treatment records, your military personnel records. They can also help you find personal private doctor records, but you have to flag those for VA. Like they don't automatically know where you treated. But if you need help getting those records, I think people get paralyzed by like, I don't even know where to begin to find all these records. And so they just don't start their claims. So if you have them, that's great. If you don't worry too much about it.
Right.
Start with just filling out the form. And then if there's holes that VA can't find stuff, they'll let you know. And then you can focus on getting those records that VA can't find.
So I know we've done other videos before on the different types of appeals, but today we're going to kind of focus on those new claims. So when we're talking about when you're talking about filing a claim, whether you're doing it on behalf of a veteran or a veteran's doing it, themselves, I guess it's important to determine what type of claim that they're going to file because there are a few different ones. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. So there are a few different ones, and it kind of depends on where you are. If you're still in service and you're within a few months of getting out, you can file a BDD claim, which is basically just giving VA a head start. And those are great because assuming you're active duty, anything that gets diagnosed during active duty service time is almost automatically going to be connected. I mean, obviously there's some of those nuances, but it gives you a head start and helps kind of develop that evidence. If you've already gotten out of service, the question is, are you filing your original claim, which is the very first claim that you've ever filed? Or are you filing, if you filed a claim, like, maybe you filed initially for your knees and your back, and then a couple years later, you're like, oh, I didn't realize I could file for sleep apnea and GERD and headaches. Mm-hmm. So that's a new claim. It's going to be on the 526EZ, which we're going to go over, but it's not your very first original claim. So for those, you don't have to kind of prove that you're a veteran again. You just have to prove the stuff related to those claims.
Or even like as well, right?
Then there's, if you're filing, like, let's say that you're already service connected for your knee, but your knee's gotten a lot worse in the past 10 years. And so you want to file a new claim for an increased rating. You're still going to use the 526EZ, the new claim form, to file for that increased rating, which is different than if you're appealing something and saying, I disagree with VA's rating on this because they missed that it's worse than it was. If VA got something wrong, 10 years ago and you want to reopen it because you've got new evidence that shows that it's service connected or that it's worse, then you're going to file it on a 20-0995, which is the supplemental claim form. And so it kind of feels like a new claim because you're reopening something, you're starting from scratch, but because it's previously been denied, it's a different form. And so sometimes people, I think, forget, like, hey, they got out, they filed a whole bunch of stuff. They don't remember what was granted, what was denied. And then 10 years later, they're going to file for stuff again. And so they might put it on a 526EZ, the new claim form, and VA will kick it back. And we see this a lot in veterans, like, I didn't, why did I get this kicked back? It's because you had, 10 years ago, you'd filed for headaches. You filed again for headaches. You can't put that on the new claim form. You have to put it on a supplemental claim form, and you need new and relevant evidence. So a piece that VA was missing from the piece of evidence that VA was missing from the original denial.
And I don't want to go too far off on a tangent here, but I see and I hear, I mean, I don't get involved in this, but I hear veterans often, maybe they filed a claim for sleep apnea related to burn pit exposure, right? And they get denied, and then they say, oh, I'm going to file it to my PTSD. And they think because they've changed the theory of the connection, that they're going to file another new claim. But that's not the case, right, Rebecca? It doesn't matter
Right.
if the reason or the rationale that you believe condition X is related to your service is now to something else. It's still not a new claim because.
Right, that would be a supplemental claim. So the new evidence there might be a new theory of service connection. So, you originally thought it was from your TBI and now you think it's from your burn pits or whatever. So you're going to send in medical literature that shows that it's related to burn pits or, whatever it is. That's a new theory, but it's not a new claim.
Right. So what are the methods that people can file new claims?
So there's a few ways that you can go about filing a new claim. You can go into your VSO and in person, they'll sit down with you and go through the paperwork, and whether they'll kind of pull up the app online and walk you through it or give you the paper and kind of look over your work and make sure that you're doing it correctly. That is a great option for a lot of people, especially if this system just seems overwhelming. They don't charge anything. You should never pay somebody to help you with filing a new claim. VA actually prohibits people from charging money for filing for new claims. So if someone is charging you, or if they're saying, oh, I'm going to get percentage of the back pay for filing a new claim, that's not ethical, and you should look for somebody who will help you file the new claim for free. And the reason for that, at least right now, is that VA has a duty to assist veterans. And so, there's times where VA gets it wrong, and then you need to hire a professional to help you correct VA's errors. And, if you're going to pay for that, that's fine. But if VA is doing their job and kind of doing all the legwork to help the veteran prove their case, and then there's some claims agency on the side that's getting paid, that's just not ethically correct. So you can work with somebody, an accredited claims agent, a VSO, to help you fill out your initial application. You can also do it online. And there's an online form that, not even a form, it's kind of like an application or a step by step. It'll walk you through and you answer one question at a time and do drop down boxes and fill out the form that way. You can also go online and print out the form, and I think we can walk through that and kind of answer some of the common questions about that form. And then if you print that out, you can drop it off at the VSO's office. You can mail it in, you can fax it in. So you have a few different options, whatever your kind of level of tech savvy and comfortability is, and how much help you kind of need filling it out. If you're more comfortable just doing it at 2 a.m. in your pajamas on your bed, then the online version might be the best option for you.
Yeah, so I'm going to pull that up so veterans can see sort of where they can go to look at some of these options. Not only where they can go to look at options, but a lot of what Rebecca and I have just discussed. VA.gov, I think, does an amazing job of having help documents that basically break down step by step what you need to do. It is so overwhelming, and I understand that. But like, if you just use the resources and go and read it, it's actually pretty simple. So they break it down like what we call Barney style, right? For those of you old school people like me. So let me add this. So this is from va.gov. Okay, so this website is va.gov/disability/how to file a claim. If you just simply Google how to file a claim, va.gov, right? It's gonna be one of your first things that pop up. Now, there's a lot of these agencies out there that try to use the keywords to get you sucked into their website. Just make sure it's a va.gov website that is showing you this information.
Right. And thanks for pulling this up, Leah, because I think, people can see this and like it, depending on which landing page you hit on, it might be a little bit different, but you're seeing the actual VA emblem. This is what VA sites look like.
Yeah. So and then you can even sign in. Like if you're, if you've got a va.gov account, you can sign in and start your application actually. So we're going to go over the paper form, but I think it's really important for you to understand that I'm not going to read all this stuff, but just a lot of what we talked about, learning about eligibility, learning about different forms. There's a video here that VA has made on YouTube. I haven't checked it out, but it might be helpful. Evidence, like Rebecca mentioned. So the online option I have personally done because I'm a veteran. It is super straightforward. I know it can seem overwhelming to do it, but they do a really good job of like step by step. It's not like 500 things on the same page. It's like, here's step one, and it asks you some basic questions. It's going to be the same questions that are basically on the paper application, but don't be afraid to use it. You can always hit pause on the application. Also, once you start that intent to file, I think you have like 365 days or whatever to finish it.
Right. Yeah. You don't have to. You don't have to have everything lined up. You can kind of start the application and then be like, okay, now I'm going to go gather my medical evidence or think through stuff before I finish the application.
Right. So I'm going to pull up that form here so we can, so there was a hyperlink to the paper form. Okay. And then it takes you here and it tells you when to use the form. It also gives you a link back to the online tool. But let's download this form. Hang on one second. Okay. Let me jump I'm on the 15th page here. All right. Okay. So Rebecca, I don't know if you want to jump in and sort of talk about just some of these basic instructions.
Yeah.
If
So
they're super important to go over.
It's, I'm not going to read the instructions to people, but I think the first 8 pages of the form are instructions, and they have links to the sections that they reference. And so some of it's general information that's kind of helpful, and the difference between the different options, instructions on where to submit it. And then it's got specific instructions for the different sections on how to answer the questions or what they're really asking for in those questions. So, it's 8 pages of super small print, where to mail it. But it is divided up. So you can kind of like reference back. I'd probably print that out. If you're working on the paper form, I'd print it out and put it to the side and then reference back if you run into a section where you're like, well, how am I supposed to answer this? Or do they really need that information?
Just spend like 10 minutes,
so
20 minutes reading over those parts as necessary.
And right? And hopefully this video will sort of, I'm not going to tell you not to read the instructions, but hopefully this video will answer a lot of the questions so that you can kind of get through reading those instructions a lot more quickly. Mm-hmm. So the first question up at the top, now the upper right-hand corner is for VA, so don't write anything where they tell you not to write stuff, obviously. The first one is whether you're doing an FDC program, standard claimant process, IDES, or BDD. And that is described up in the instructions. IDES is when you're doing a medical board separation, you'll be instructed if that's the one for you. The BDD program, like we were talking about, is really great if you're still active duty, but you're getting ready to separate from service, because they'll help you develop the evidence. And there's nothing better than developing the evidence and sending you to medical exams while you're still in service, because how can they say that's not connected unless it was pre-existing? Mm-hmm. Most of the time you're going to want to click, if you're already out of service, most of the time you're going to want to click the fully developed claim program. That just means that either you'll send VA records or alert them to where they are. If you do the standard claim process, VA will kind of go out of its way a little bit more to help you collect your private medical records, but that's going to add a lot more time to the processing. So even if you don't have everything or you need VA's help getting certain things, the fully developed claim program typically is going to speed stuff up for you.
Sure.
Okay, then this is kind of your identifying information. It kind of goes without saying, you do need to put your social security number on this page and then at the top of every page below. The one question that I think is really important to answer there is whether this is your first time filing a claim or not. Because if it's your first time filing a claim, you're going to need to put more information in there because it's the first time you're triggering VA to go find your DD-214, find your service treatment records, find your personnel records. And so they need a little bit more help locating that stuff. And so there's more questions down below that you're going to have to answer. If you've already filled out one of these forms for your first claim and now you're filing claims for something else, a year or two later, it's okay to skip over some of the stuff because VA already has your branch of service and where you served and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to keep scrolling down.
Okay.
Change of address. That's if you have changed your address, you want to add that in. If it's your first claim, then obviously that doesn't even apply. It's important to keep VA up to date on your address. There's that box at the top to enter your social security number. The homelessness section, VA will process your claim more quickly if you are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless because of their commitment to make sure that all veterans have stable housing. So, being at risk of homeless could be you're sleeping on a friend's couch or you don't have stable housing or whatnot. It doesn't have to mean like you're living in a homeless shelter, on the streets. If you're not at risk of being homeless, you don't even have to click no to the top box. You can just skip over this section entirely.
Okay.
The next section is new. They've added this to the form since the PACT Act came into effect in 2022. I believe I just started seeing this in the past few months. Definitely within the past year that they've added this on. But this is because VA will presumptively link certain conditions to certain exposures. And even beyond presumptive, they'll go above and beyond to kind of look into whether on a facts found basis, certain toxins caused certain conditions. They want your help. They'll have your military personnel records, but they want your help identifying if you served in certain areas and if you did, what dates. The more specific you can be, better. I think you have to be, if you're like, oh, was it June or July of 2017 that we deployed? VA is not going to sit there and go, oh, you lied because you said July and it was actually June. So do the best you can to fill this out. But I think with everything here, you want to be honest, but I don't think trap. I think people get paralyzed because they can't find all the details, and so they just kind of start and then stop. So I wouldn't, I put a note in there, say to the best of my knowledge, or approximately this date to this date, or leave the month empty and put the year or something if it was a while ago and you just don't remember. Have you been exposed to any of the following? If you think you have, I would click yes. Most people will know what they've been exposed to it to a certain extent. You may not know what was burning in the burn pits or which chemicals you were exposed to, but do your best to answer these because it will help VA do the extra development to get stuff connected.
Yeah, and if there's other things, they have a other block, right? So if you have, like
firefighting foam, I think isn't on there.
The PFAS exposure, or if maybe there's some paints or toxins, paints or chemicals that you were using on a daily basis, or different fuels, or whatever, right? You can indicate it there so that they know maybe they're going to do that Terra exam and they know to like kind of address some of those things rather than just guess.
And they have that tiny box for those of you who had multiple deployments. Like, well, which one should I list? List your extra dates at the bottom. And then here they've got an example. So this is getting into how to list your claims on there. And they have examples. I don't know that it's an exact science. So you list your condition, and we'll talk a little bit about what to list as a condition. Then you list examples of the exposure type and examples of how the disability is related to service. So here they have hearing loss. It was caused by noise. And then how was noise related to service? Well, there were heavy equipment operators in service. Or I went to the firing range in service. And then date of onset. And this is, for most people, is going to be kind of a guess or a best estimate, especially for conditions that are progressive or gradual. It's not like you woke up one day and had ringing in your ears, unless there was one incident where you woke up. But yeah, you want to kind of show when the condition began. So you're listing your current disabilities, and so these are, I have had this question asked before, like, do I have to list all my disabilities? These are your disabilities that have not already been service connected, or the new ones that you want VA to consider on this claim form. So if you've already filled this out and for most of your claims, and now you just want to add your knees, you don't have to list all your other conditions. This claim form is just for the new ones that you want VA to look at. So you're just going to put your knees on here. You don't have to relist everything. In terms of how to describe your condition, you want to be both as specific as possible, but also cast as broad of a net as you can. So if you don't know exactly what's going on in your back, if you write back condition, that's enough to trigger VA to look at your back. And is it intervertebral disc syndrome? Is it degenerative arthritis? Is it low back pain? Excuse me, low back strain? It could be some combination of those. If you put low back pain, VA is going to look at all of those, and they might give you multiple ratings for, depending on which part of your back is injured or whatever. The flip side is you want to try to direct VA. So if you know what's wrong with you, you want to direct VA to look at that thing. So you're not, if you know that you've got a herniated disc at L4, L5, and that's the main thing that's wrong with your back, and you've got medical records to support that, you may want to say herniated disc at L4, L5. I will sometimes, I know you'd said it's not a separate claim if you have different theories of service connection for something. If there's space, I will sometimes list them on separate lines, though, on the same application form, just because that very clearly triggers VA to look at the different theories of service connection. So they're not separate claims, but I'm asking VA to look at, was my sleep apnea caused by burn pits? Was my sleep apnea caused by obesity secondary to PTSD and my knees? Was sleep apnea caused by just by PTSD and tinnitus? So each one, that I don't know exactly what caused it, but I want VA to look at each one of those theories. I might list it, 3 times here. You don't need to do that. I'm just trying to make it as kind of simple for VA personnel to follow my train of thought as possible. VA does have a duty to assist. So if you write something on there in a confusing way, they should get clarification. Or if you kind of cast too broad of a net, they should do some exams to try to narrow it down and help figure out what exactly is wrong. So you want to steer them in the right direction, while giving them enough room to capture everything that's actually going on with you. So,
yeah.
And then you don't have a whole lot of space to write in here how something is related to service. So it's just a sentence or, a few words of Agent Orange in Vietnam. Noise exposure on the range.
Hurt me in 1994. Lifting a wall locker, whatever.
Okay. So this part is if treatment began from 2005 to present. you do not need to provide the date. So if you're treating at a VA facility, VA has access to those. But if you treated at a VA facility prior to 2005 and you want VA to try to access those records, you want to tip them off like, oh yeah, I was treating at the Hampton VA in 1996.
Okay.
So you want to give them the dates, or I don't have the dates. But again, you're trying to, if they're doing record searches for you, you want to steer them in the right direction as much as possible. Okay. And then this is the section, if you've already, on page 12, if you've already filled out an application, this is your second or third application for different conditions, I usually leave most of this blank. I probably would fill out the branch of service, but VA already has this. They've already gone and gotten your DD-214. They already have a file open for you, so they don't need this information again. But like we talked earlier, should I get my DD-214 before I file a claim? If you have it, that's great. If not, filling out this information is what's going to trigger VA to be able to put in those records requests to find your service information and your service treatment records.
Okay.
Okay, this section is kind of interesting, the service retired pay. And we won't go into detail on this right now, but we can definitely do another talk about the combat related special compensation and concurrent retirement disability pay. And I believe Congress is contemplating some new bills that would allow veterans under any circumstances to receive all of their retired pay and all of their VA disability. But as it stands right now, there are some offsets under certain circumstances. So you want to fill this out honestly, because, and this is just your VA or your DoD retirement pay or separation pay or severance pay. They're not asking you, for, if you have a pension from working at the fire department for 20 years after you got out of service, like they don't care about all of your assets. They're just trying to see if there's an offset between the DoD retirement pay and VA disability pay.
Sure. I think that Richard Starr Act, is that one of the ones that they're kind of looking at right now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pretty interesting. We won't go over it, but if you guys have time, go Google the Richard Starr Act.
Yeah, and if you have the time to lobby for with your representatives on it, or reach out to your representatives, I personally think it's BS that your retirement pay is something you earn based on the amount of time that you spent in service. Mm-hmm. And your rank and the service that you provided to this country. Your disability pay is to compensate you based on the amount of injury and disability that you succumbed during service or because of service. And so to offset them, I just think is, mm-hmm. I think it's morally wrong, but obviously legally right now it's still, mm-hmm. It's still possible under certain circumstances. So, yeah. Okay. So this one, you just want to kind of go through and answer. If you answer it incorrectly and VA overpays you, they can generate a debt and go after you for debt. And it could be a small amount each month. But if, I've had situations where VA didn't realize they were overpaying someone, and then 10 or 15 years later, they try to go back and collect it. Now we're talking $30,000 debt or something. So you want to be honest with this stuff.
Yeah, especially if you are someone who received like a severance for, maybe you got chaptered out of the military for, you took the chapter, I think it's chapter 8 for pregnancy, right? You decided to get out because you wanted to be a mom, or maybe you got chaptered for whatever the reason. They're going to, in a lot of circumstances, they're going to take that out of your earnings, right? They're going to recoup that money. Again, we won't get into that too much today, but that's sort of what that severance section is. Separation severance pay is about, right?
Yep. And then the next section is super important. You don't want VA mailing you paper checks, especially with the state of the U.S. Postal Service recently. And if you start this claim and then it takes 2 years between different appeals or whatever to get paid, and by then you've moved, you don't want them mailing you. They can mail you a paper check, and I've had plenty of clients who've received paper checks, and And it's fine, but it's much smoother if the money gets deposited into your bank account automatically. I will say I've learned recently it actually has to be an FDIC insured bank. So
Okay.
I've had a handful of clients that bank with these like they're not really banks like Chime or like the online like Venmo is their only form of banking, like these electronic payment things. And
Mhm.
the US Department of Treasury cannot deposit, and VA through Department of Treasury cannot deposit money into a Chime account. So you actually have to have a,
Okay,
a bank account with a banking institution.
that makes sense. So then just
And
here's
then
the
here's where you sign and just look at it carefully. If you are the veteran, sign where it says veteran signature and date there. And then you don't need a witness unless you are incapable of signing. So if the veteran is paralyzed and can only sign or illiterate or whatever and can only sign with an X, then you need a witness. But um, it's very rare that you're going to need a witness for signing this. And if it's your very first, if your original claim, initial claim with VA, the veteran does have to sign it. After they filed one, if they file for new conditions down the line, then their representative can sign on their behalf. So if you scroll down, there's other places for the VSO or an attorney to sign.
yeah.
And so you just want to make sure you actually have a wet signature. You don't want to type your signature in. VA will frequently reject applications if you just type in your name. Um, you can do a drawn signature on the computer, but you actually do want to have something that looks like a signature on there.
Oh,
And then there's extra pages if you don't
okay.
have enough disabilities on the first one.
Yeah.
Um, I will say, you want to cast a broad net. You want to file for things that you actually have, but like all of the things that you actually have that could possibly be related to service. But you don't want to cast such a broad net that you're kind of bogging down the VA system and VA is trying to figure out like, they're sending you for 20 exams. I know in some circles, there's been bad guidance where they say, oh, well, if we're exposed to burn pits, you automatically have a claim. If you don't have a current disability, you don't have a claim right now. Um, so you want to put some thought into this. I see this extra page with another 20 lines on it, and it kind of makes my head spin. Like, if it's the first time you're filing a claim and you're very disabled, you might have 20 or 40 conditions because you might have, 3 conditions on your right knee and 3 conditions on your left knee, and multiple things related to respiratory and multiple things related to gastrointestinal. And, each joint might be messed up. So, like, there are some veterans that legitimately have a lot of stuff. Um,
Mhm.
but just be mindful that listing 40 things on here is likely to delay the processing of the claim if they're not legitimate. So you want to stick to the stuff that's got a legitimate reason that it could be service connected.
Well, I have just a couple more questions for you. So that was the end of the application. I just have a couple more questions for you. So let's talk about, so after that's filed, I think my next question was about CMP exams, right?
Mhm.
Um,
So yeah, so VA has, like I said, VA has the duty to assist you. So they're going to spend some time before they even schedule CMP exams. They're going to spend some time pulling together your service treatment records, getting some whatever medical records, your VA records if you're treating at a VA hospital. And then they'll look at it and they'll kind of see, is there enough here for us to trigger our duty to assist? And so if you list stuff and you have no records of anything happening in service, you didn't put any buddy statements that anything happened in service, you don't have any records of a current diagnosis, but you just put it on the form, it's not going to trigger VA's duty to assist and they're not going to send you to a CMP exam. But if there's kind of just enough there that, hey, something happened in service, or hey, I have a current diagnosis, I think it's related to service, VA will send you to a CMP exam, and those are usually done through contracted examiners. I believe, Leah, you're qualified as a CMP examiner for some of the companies, right?
Yeah, so I previously worked for several of the exam companies, and I think I don't want to say 100% of them are being contracted out now, but most of them are being contracted out. So I've got a lot of videos on what happens in a CMP exam. So if you have a particular condition that you'd like to go, the format is generally the same. They're going to send you a packet in the mail, tell you about who your examiner is, the date and the time, how long the person has been a CMP examiner, what their specialty is. And that's pretty much it. And then you just show up and they go through the DBQ with you, the individualized disability benefit questionnaires for whatever that condition is. And then they submit that information back to VA so that the adjudicators can review that along with the rest of your evidence, right?
Yep. And we do get questions a lot, like, do I have to go to the CMP exam? And I mean, it's a nuanced question. You should probably talk to your VSO or representative. But if you're doing this on your own, it's important to understand that VA essentially, at least at the initial levels, they need some guidance on both, is it service connected?
Mm-hmm.
And if it is, what are your symptoms in a way that aligns with how VA rates it? So they're going to need that DBQ. So if you're just sending in your treatment notes and some buddy letters or something, and then you say, well, I don't want to go to a CMP exam because I don't trust VA or something. VA is going to deny that claim. Even if you have a Nexus letter, very often, if you don't have a disability benefit questionnaire that kind of says, yes, your range of motion was 45 degrees on this joint and 23 degrees in that direction, or whatever, or you've got very frequent and prolonged migraines productive of severe economic inadaptability, if those boxes aren't checked for VA, they might say, well, yeah, we think they have a condition because we see a diagnosis and we see that it's connected, but for all we know, it's rated 0% because we don't have this disability benefit questionnaire. So you really, in the very beginning, I'd say it's a rare circumstance, and there are some veterans that will develop the stuff and kind of get those DBQs filled out and get the Nexus letters and then just say, hey, I don't want anyone else to look at this. But for the most part, it's usually good in the beginning to go to these exams. And if you get a bad examiner or you've got an issue, I'm sure we could do a whole nother.
Yeah.
You've done many on them on, how to deal with the CMP exams. But in the beginning, yeah, you want to help VA help you get the evidence that they need to do a grant. And then you're sort of narrowing down the issues that you might need to appeal on. So, maybe they'll grant 3 out of 5. And now you're just working on gathering evidence or gathering some legal theories on the final 2 conditions.
So can you submit additional evidence while the claim's still open? Can a veteran do that?
Yes,
Okay.
you can. And VA is required by law to review it. Depending on when you send it in, the examiner may not have time to see it. If you send it in after the exam after the decision was written, but before it was finalized, they may not have time to re-review it and change the decision. But yeah, at any point that a claim is pending, you can add in additional evidence, and VA is supposed to consider it.
So what happens after your CMP exam while you're waiting for your VA's decision?
Deep breaths and meditation.
Yeah.
So it's VA, it's a bureaucratic system. And so your claim file gets bounced from kind of employee to employee with different checks and balances throughout. So you've got you file your claim. So initially they're going to gather the evidence, and then they're going to determine whether there's enough to send you to a CMP exam. And then they're going to send you to the CMP exam. Then they're going to wait for that exam company or that examiner to upload the exam results into the system. And they're going to review them to see if those exams meet their criteria, are adequate, or if they need to send them back for any kind of revisions or additional questions. Once somebody signs off that those CMPs are adequate for rating purposes, then your claim gets marked as ready for decision, which means VA's got all the evidence that it thinks it needs to make a decision. It may be a good decision or a bad decision. It doesn't mean they think they have everything they need to grant. It just means they've got enough to make a decision on it. Then that file gets put into kind of a queue to be assigned to a rating officer. That rating officer could look at the evidence and say, actually, we need additional clarification on this exam, and it could kind of re-trigger something to go back. So it's hard from the outside to know like how long something's going to take. But there are different stages, and I think people will see that, or the stuff that we see on our end on the veteran benefit management system as a representative is a little bit different than the veteran facing portals. And so sometimes you're like, my claim file's on the reviewer's desk. Like, well, you don't know which reviewer or how long they have to review that file or which pieces they're looking at. So it could be that they're making a decision that day. It could be that it's going to be another couple months. It's really hard to kind of predict exactly where you are in the system after you have that exam.
Yeah, it's just so variable. So from my perspective, which is a little bit different, like VA.gov, I think you and I looked at it earlier, said that their average turnaround time on these claims is 135 days right now. That's for new claims. I don't know about for supplemental claims or different appeals, but and that's information you can look at on VA.gov, but that doesn't mean, I've seen people get their claims approved in a week, right? I've seen, especially if I think they're testing out this AI and these different automated systems to I think those are more so for increases than necessarily brand new claims, which an increase can be a new claim essentially, but not a new claim. It's a new, anyways, going down a rabbit hole there. But I've also seen where from the examiner standpoint, maybe somebody in my office did an exam on somebody, they submitted it and quality control sent it, went to VA and VA said, oh, there's an issue with this, send it back to the examiner. So maybe the rater had it. And like you said, they said, oh, this is not sufficient, for rating purposes, we need to ask an additional question. So they send it back to the examiner. Maybe the examiner's on vacation. Maybe the examiner quit. Maybe the examiner died. And then guess what? They're probably going to have to order a whole brand new exam because they can't get clarification on the exam, or perhaps they send it to a third examiner or a second examiner to review what the first one did. So there's so many what ifs that it's like.
And the question could be, did the examiner not answer the question right? Or was the question written so poorly that no one in their right mind could ever answer that question in a way that would give any kind of clarity on the claim? So they have to rewrite the exam request and then have someone answer that different exam request. So there's a lot of bureaucracy, and I think people kind of want the simple answer, like, from start to finish, how long is it going to take? And VA estimates 135 days. Like you said, like I had another client who their claim was incorrectly flagged for terminal illness, and so they decided it was an appeal, but they decided it in like a couple days. She's like, "You're amazing. You move so fast." I'm like, VA thinks you're terminally ill. And she's like, "Am I?" And I'm like, "No, it was just somebody clicked the wrong box. I mean, not that I know of, but for whatever reason, that one got moved really quickly. And then there's others that you're like, this should be really simple. Like, I've got all the evidence and it's just sitting on someone's desk and they're not clicking the next box to move it to the next stage, or, they're taking the full amount of time before they move it to the next stage, or something needs re-review. Yeah, there's just so many reasons why stuff could take longer that's really outside our control.
All right, so I just have a couple more questions for you before we wrap up. So once so you're waiting for that decision and then you finally receive a decision. So what happens after you receive the decision, or how do you receive it?
So you'll receive the decision in the mail. If you're working with a VSO, they might get an electronic copy and be able to tell you before you receive it in the mail. And if you're monitoring it online, I think you have some access to information, but I don't think you have the full rationale on why something was granted or why it was denied, or, so you're waiting until you get that decision in the mail. And then you have a year from the date of that decision, typically, to file an appeal. So if you think that they denied something that they should have granted, or if they rated something but they rated it too low, you want to look at the reasons why they denied it. You don't want to just refile. You want to, at that point, that would be a good time to, if you're not already working with a VSO, accredited claims agent, or an accredited VA attorney, it might be a good time to reach out to somebody, because you're not just throwing something like, oh, that didn't work, let me try again. You want to kind of look at what was wrong. Was I missing something that VA needed, or was VA just stupid, or was the examiner, and you're not going to get a copy of that exam. So but an accredited claims agent or an accredited attorney will be able to see the CMP exam. And so we'll be able to see if there was something wrong in the way that that exam was written that might trigger a duty to assist error, or we'll say, hey, at this point, it really makes sense to get a private medical opinion. And so we'll send them to Leah or whoever the expert is that's best suited for that kind of opinion.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if at some point VA starts putting claims related I mean, I know they started adding rating decision letters, which I think is really cool. But if they start putting like the CMP exams, I mean, of course, if you had a CMP exam at the VA, that will likely be in your VA blue button medical record. But like those outside exams, if they start making those, and they're accessible if you know, request your claims file, but it takes a while, right?
It takes a year, and then by then I mean, it often takes a year or more to get those claim files, and you only have a year to appeal. So by the time you get access to those records,
Yeah,
you've already had to make the strategic decision of what kind of appeal to file or whether to file an appeal. Yeah, I think they should be made available to veterans. I mean, I think that they're worded so poorly so often, and they're really confusing that I understand VA's concern that if we make these available in the way that they're currently formatted, it's just going to cause more confusion. So if you're going to access it, you should access it through someone who has more experience kind of understanding what this means and is this favorable and you know what um but it's your information. So I think veterans should have access to it. And probably the long-term answer would be to make the forms less confusing and
right.
more
And
understandable.
doing a better job making sure that there aren't a bunch of inaccuracies and mistakes. But again, like you mentioned earlier, it's like a bureaucratic system, and it's just a challenge. But we're all working through it together, and I think VA's doing its best to try to make improvements for veterans. So
Yeah.
I don't have any more questions for you. I hope this was informative for you guys out there watching. Maybe it can ease some of the stress and tension on doing these types of things. And if not, you know, there are people out there, VSOs. Like I mentioned earlier, I have a great video on how to access, you know, va.gov's search criteria for any kind of accredited claims agent, attorney, or VSO. You can go watch my video on that, or you can just jump over to va.gov and look for the accreditation search tool. Rebecca is an amazing attorney if you need help with appeals. You know, I'm going to put her information in the comment section, or not the comments, in the description of this video, but it's ProVet Legal. And if you haven't caught any of our other videos, you might want to go and check some of those out, especially the one about when to hire a VA attorney. That's a really great video we did together. But outside of that, thank you so much for being here with us again today, Rebecca. It's always amazing when you're on. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Leah. And yeah, like you said, hopefully this sort of was a soft dive into it and eases some of the anxiety about just paralyzation of just getting started, and so more people can kind of get started with the process and get the benefits you guys deserve.
All right. Well, thanks again for watching, guys. Please drop some comments and like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you guys later. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.